Hi, my name's Matthew and I'm an IELTS speaking teacher at Shinyway in Guangzhou. Today I'm going to give you some tips for how to do the IELTS speaking well. I think one of the most important points when you're doing IELTS speaking is to know what your goal is. To find out your goal, you should really look at the band descriptors. These tell you what each band in the IELTS means. So band 0 to band 9. What do they actually mean? If you want to go to university abroad and it says that you need a band 6, you need to understand what a band 6 is in order to then work towards it and do well in your test. If you don't think about understanding this first, then you really don't know where your goal is. You don't know where to focus on when actually practicing your English. So this is a very important place to start. And you can find the band descriptors on the IELTS websites. They're public, and you can look at them to understand for yourself how you need to practice for this. Then you should understand the marking criteria. Now for IELTS speaking there are 4 marking criteria. The first one is fluency and coherence. The examiner is looking for you to speak in a fluent manner. They want to see that you can speak without too many long pauses or hesitations. They want to see that you're not going to repeat yourself. Repeating words again and again is one way to show that you're not very comfortable in the language. The second important one is vocabulary. You've got to demonstrate your vocabulary, and not just how many words you can use, but how well you can use them. The third one, of course, is grammar. The better the grammar, the higher your score. And like with the words, it's not just the grammar you know, but how well you use it, if you use the right grammar in the right place. And the last one, with speaking, is pronunciation. Pronunciation is of course a very important one with speaking. If you're speaking in a way that people can't understand, even if your grammar and your vocabulary are great, then it's not really very helpful for everyday communication. So I've got some general tips now, which apply to the whole IELTS exam, into the speaking part. You should be confident. Try not to be too shy. Try not to speak too fast. Maintain eye contact and use body language. Also, when you're speaking, don't just try to focus on one area. For example, if you think your grammar is bad and you spend the exam focusing on your grammar, this can really take a lot away from your fluency. And you've got to remember that grammar and fluency are both worth 25%. So don't sacrifice one for the other. Try to be balanced in your speaking. Obviously, always answer in full sentences. Never just say yes or no. IELTS is not just about answering the questions. You should try to see the questions they ask you as a platform on which you can then give them an answer. In your answer, take the opportunity to practice your English, to give as many examples, as many points as you can. Also, try to make your answers more personal. If you can speak from your own experience, it tends to be more easy. You don't have to lie, you don't have to make things up. You can just say things as you've experienced them. Say what you think. This will help your fluency. It's also good if you can use the right tenses, different past tenses, the future tense, and modal verbs like should, would, could, might. These are all great to use in IELTS. It's important too never to memorize answers. Your answers should be natural. They should fit the question. If you memorize answers, the examiners can tell, and they can change the topic, because they're not looking for memorized answers, they're looking for your real English ability. So by all means, before you go into the test, brainstorm, think around the topics, common topics like your home and your work and your studies, but don't memorize answers, because they probably won't fit exactly with the questions that you're asked. Also, in the exam, you should be conversational. It's not a formal exam in the IELTS speaking. Of course, there's the academic and the general training IELTS, but academic and general training only affect the reading and writing areas. They don't affect the speaking. So the speaking, it's important to keep it like you would speak to a friend of a friend, polite but conversational. Also, sometimes you might need to use a name or a word in Chinese in the exam, or in your own language. For example, a city or a place name, or perhaps a noun for something like a dessert that you don't know in English. If this is the case, say it slowly and explain it well. Don't just say a word in Chinese to them without explaining it. This is a very important point. Imagine that the examiner doesn't know any of your own language. In English, you should not use words that you're not 100% sure about. Sometimes you think the word sounds really good, but if it's the wrong word in that sentence, it could bring your marks down. So stick to words that you're confident with. And of course, don't change the topic. This is a really important point in IELTS. Sometimes students think about one thing and then they go off on a bit of a tangent. Try to focus on keeping things to the question, especially in part 2. It's also an important point to note that asking questions in IELTS is not forbidden. This is okay in many situations. Often it's better to ask a question about something that you're not sure about than just try and guess what they're talking about. But there are techniques to this. You shouldn't just say to the examiner, "What do you mean?" This is a lazy question and it will give the examiner a bad impression of you. You should try to guess what they're actually talking about. So you can ask them something like, "What does something mean?" But better would be, "When you say something, do you mean this or do you mean that?" This way you're guessing. The examiner can see that you're trying to understand from the context what they're saying. This is a more active thing to do. And of course, when you're speaking to the examiner, you should remember never to butt in. Don't interrupt them when they're speaking to you. Wait until they've finished and then speak back to them. This is just polite. Some of the other very important points are to use your creativity in your answers. Don't just think A, B, C. Don't just think about the most basic and simple answer to that question. But if you can be a little bit more creative and think of an answer which is on topic but maybe a little bit more interesting, this really helps. Also, avoid some really common words like always, nice, and interesting. Try to think of other words that you can use which really show your vocabulary and practice those before the exam. This will also really help to lift your marks up. Lastly, not knowing the answer is not a big problem. Remember that IELTS is not just about answering all the questions correctly. Sometimes you might not know the answer, but this is another opportunity for you to show what grammar you can use. You could say, "Well, I'm not sure about this, but it might be this," or "I've seen that." And you can use structures like these to help you to speculate or to guess about what the answer could be. And this is a great method to show the IELTS examiners another form of grammar that you know. I hope you find these tips helpful, and I'll be sending another video soon.